Good morning, everybody. You started. First thing, I'm going to call the roll or go down the roll for those who are in attendance, and we'll see if I missed anybody. Bob and Mary Burr, not on. Tom Doak is here. Dana Duran is here. Greg Foster is here. Rebecca Graham is here. Don Kleiner is absent today. Paul Larrabee is here. Nancy Sfera is absent. Heather Spalding is here. Mike St. Peter, absent. Pat Strauch is here. Nathan Wadsworth, absent. Jonathan Labonte, not here. Pat Royce is here. Will Cole is here. And we have Peter Coughlin, Mark Hedrick, also here as presenters. Okay, welcome to the meeting of the LD 1407 stakeholder group. We have a meeting that will take us until about noon today. I'm going to review the ground rules and agenda, and then we'll jump right into presentations. I do have a couple of announcements. One, when we invited you all to participate, we scheduled October 6th as a possible meeting. That is now confirmed. So I'll be sending you a meeting invite for October 6th shortly. Second, there are some folks who will need to get off the call at 10 o'clock for another meeting with DECD. They'll be off for about an hour and then they'll be back on. But this meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be made available after the meeting. Anything else, Patty?
Nope, I think we're good to go.
Okay, does anybody have any questions about the agenda? We're going to have presentations from Peter Coughlin at the DOT Local Road Center, Mark Hedrick from the Bureau of Agriculture regarding the Farmland Protection Act, and then Paul Larrabee regarding his recent experience in a local ordinance issue in the town of Sweden. After that, we'll discuss the issues that we need to address and if we can, begin to formulate recommendations. We'll take public comment around just after 11:30 and for about 15 minutes or so, and then we'll discuss the next meeting and where we need to go, homework assignments and all that, and we'll be out of here by noon. Peter Coughlin, are you here? Peter?
So this is our first time trying out this hybrid model, so be patient, please. He shows he's on.
Peter, are you there? Okay, Nathan Wadsworth has joined us. We're going to have Mark go and hope that Peter can work out the technical issues. Is that okay, Mark? Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'd like to welcome Mark Hedrick from the Bureau of Agriculture. He's going to present as the group requested on the Maine Farmland Protection Act. Oh. You're all
Is
set.
that, is that there? Oh, good. Okay. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk to you about the Maine Agriculture Protection Act, but I'm also
See
going
your face now.
to, oh. Okay, try that. I'm in the hayfield, as usual. Okay. I'm also going to talk about the agricultural compliance program because it's pretty hard to divorce the two things. Most of what I'm talking about in the ag compliance program relates to livestock agriculture. But hopefully a lot of that will translate to some of you.
Just try to page 10.
Oh, I lost it.
No, you go.
Doing what it's supposed to do.
Bottom of the slides, there's arrows.
See on the screen.
Yeah. All right, okay. Maybe I better sit here, I don't stand up, I don't know, let's see. All right. Try it again. So, the Maine Agricultural Protection Act began around 1981. It's mostly affectionately known as the Right to Farm Law, but ironically nowhere in the Maine Agricultural Protection Act is the term right to farm used. But it now operates in Title VII under Chapter 6, and it essentially operates under Chapter 10 rules of the Agricultural Compliance Program. So again, let's see what happens. Okay, good. So the Maine Agriculture Compliance Program is really a program of the Department of Ag that investigates and resolves complaints from the public concerning farms. It also investigates threats to human and animal health and safety and to the environment under various statutes. So we have a number of places we can go for authority to investigate various issues. Okay, so essentially the program helps the farmer develop or remain in compliance with best management practices, and these BMPs, which you'll hear me mention quite a few times in the next few minutes, have a lot to do with a farmer maintaining his right to farm protection. So why is it beneficial to farmers, to the public? Well, because the program helps resolve complaints between farmers or between farmers and the neighbors or others, and we resolve them in what we believe is a timely method. And of course, that involves the modification or adoption of best management practices. So we've always felt that having this program, it certainly helps to keep farms operating, keep various ag businesses operating that support those farms, and certainly it helps to retain land and agricultural production. A little drag here. Very fast. I lost it down here. We're not moving.
Okay, maybe I can do it. Okay. Does that work?
Coming up. Wait a minute, okay. Coming back. Don't go to sleep, everyone. The window's up right in here, I think.
can see 6. The odors.
Okay, well, we're on 6, good. At last. So we look at all kinds of complaints, and I'm not gonna dwell on this because, I think it's pretty obvious what kinds of complaints are involved with farms, everything from odors to animal carcass issues to cull potatoes, and I won't spend a lot of time on that. So, try to, this is showing up here. Try to move on. Okay. Well, so who investigates complaints? We have 2 agricultural compliance officers who cover the entire state. And when an officer comes up with an issue, he may request assistance from other people, from certain specialists who have more expertise in that particular area than he does, or he may get other department staff to assist, and this is very common for that to happen. So how does this work? Well, essentially, the complainant contacts the department, may contact me, may contact the commissioner. If there's a really hot under the collar about something, they might contact the governor's office. So you never know where it's gonna come from. And then, of course, when the ag compliance officer gets that complaint, he's gonna fill out a form, and he's gonna try to find out what the nature of that complaint is, needless to say, and go from there. So certainly the compliance officer is going to do an on-site investigation to determine if an agricultural problem actually exists. That may sound like a strange statement, but many of the complaints we get are really not bona fide complaints. It's often neighbors fighting with neighbors, family members fighting with family members, and they see a regulatory agency as a good way to get back at those people for some perceived or maybe real injustice, but usually it's just a means of trying to get back at that person for something that they don't like about them, something they've done to them, or they think that thing has been done to them. So after that initial investigation, certainly there's going to be a report written. Compliance officer is going to determine if the farm is using appropriate BMPs. It's going to see if there really are any undue environmental impacts or are any impacts on the neighboring residents or landowners. So this is pretty common. What's he going to do? He's going to list the findings of the investigation, and he'll put down all the information that's relevant. And he's going to use that thing that we often use in the department and other places called BPJ, Best Professional Judgment, which is based on their professional training and experience, and making a determination of what really should be done in this situation. So what's going to be in those recommendations, the best management practices that have to be implemented that will solve the problem, the steps to be taken to do that, what the reasons are, and the date by which implementation must be finalized. And he's going to go back. We don't just look at the issue, go there, and we forget about it. Often the compliance officer will go back and make sure that things have been done that was supposed to have been done. Sometimes they don't have to. It's a very simple issue, but in some complex issues, you might go back many, many times. So there's a number of factors that influence those recommendations. It's going to be going to evaluate what's around the area, financial resources, are the streams being impacted, rivers being impacted, the noise issues that are affecting a neighbor, what kinds of crops are being grown, any other kind of issue that may be pertinent to that problem. Again, if there is a problem. So we're finally getting to that definition of BMPs, and there's a lot of definitions of best management practices, but we tend to use this one. They're the agricultural practices that are preferred methods based on best reasonably available and economically feasible methods, technologies that are technically and environmentally sound. It's essentially doing the right thing in the right place at the right time. So we have what we call general and site-specific best management practices. Now, they're really the same thing, but I'll explain that in a second. And we have collections of these general best management practices in various reference manuals. And those manuals constitute a menu from which one or more of these practices can be selected and put together to solve that problem. Rarely will one BMP be needed to solve a problem. It usually takes a number of them to address that issue. So, we have site-specific BMPs are really when you take a number of those general BMPs, put them together to fit the characteristics of that site, then we call them site-specific BMPs, which sort of makes sense. And so, who develops those BMPs? Well, the Ag Compliance Officer can do it. He can designate someone to do it who is qualified. Actually, the farmer can do it himself or herself with the concurrence of the Ag Compliance Officer. But they have to address all the issues that need to be handled. And they have to be site-specific, and they have to deal with all those relevant factors. So, many of those BMPs can be found in, well, can be found in a number of places. The department, we have what we call a manual of best management practices. Maine Agriculture, I have copies of that in the office if anybody wants it. You can also go to our website and find it there. It's, I'm going to say it's a little outdated in a way, but many of the practices that are in there are pretty much timeless. Although we have been updating various sections of it recently. There's been several sections updated. There are also the Natural Resources Conservation Service, which is a division of U.S. Department of Agriculture, has many technical manuals with lots of information that they use. University of Maine Cooperative Extension has manuals that can be used. There's sources of these materials all over the place. And you can go online now and find almost anything you want. So, as I mentioned before, the compliance officer may go back to the farm and make sure these BMPs have been implemented. We don't just forget about it after the day is over. And we want to make sure that the issue's been addressed appropriately. So, what happens if there's a little bit of a disagreement between the farmer and the compliance officer for what should be done? Well, most of these compliance officers have a lot of experience with agriculture. Many of them are farmers themselves, so they understand the impacts of what their recommendations will have potentially on that operation. So they try to make recommendations that make sense. But they've got to solve the issue, it also will make practical sense for that operation. So if things still aren't convivial or congenial or whatever you want to call it, the farmer can request a meeting with the program director and the Ag Compliance Officer, and they can try to resolve those issues in an informal way. It's rare that happens. Usually the compliance officer and the farmer can resolve it on their own. But if an impasse does occur, the farmer can file a formal appeal with the Nutrient Management Review Board, which is a 7-member board that consists of nutrient management specialists, farmers, other people who can review the entire matter, and they can affirm, amend, or reverse a compliance officer decision. And that, after they do that, that pretty much ends the matter. Now, there's another method we call information gathering meetings. Farmer Commissioner agreed to the facilitation. The Nutrient Management Review Board can have these meetings with these folks and try to resolve the issue. This rarely happens. I don't know when this has ever happened since I've been here. I think it never happened before I was here either. But the formal process where you go to a formal hearing, that's only happened about 3, maybe 4 times since I've been here. So it really doesn't happen very often. Well, there's a few questions that often come up, and I'm going to talk about them in a second here. But so the Maine Agricultural Protection Act, what really is it from a practical standpoint? Well, it's a defense that's available to farmers against nuisance suits brought by neighbors or against municipal zoning violations where it's determined that enforcement of the ordinances involved would prohibit the use of best management practices by that farm. So, right to farm law, or Maine Agricultural Protection Act, which is the official name, it applies to farms, farm operations, and agricultural composting operations. We won't get into that today necessarily. But it specifies that these operations, and this is kind of the crux of the whole thing, may not be considered a nuisance under law if that operation is in compliance with applicable state, federal laws, rules, and regulations, and conforms to those best management practices that I've mentioned 100 times already. So in the past, sometimes farm would say, well, I have right to farm protection. I don't have to do a lot of these things, you know. It's okay if I spill a little manure on the road, or if I get a little manure in the stream, or, you know, if I annoy the neighbor a little bit, well, too bad. Well, that's not the case. Farmer only has right to farm protection if he's not violating any of those rules, laws that are applicable to that farm operation. And it's important that they be in conformance with those best management practices to have that right to farm protection. Otherwise, it's no good, it's no go. So how does right to farm law interface with municipal ordinances that might prohibit or restrict farming activities? Well, the municipality is required to submit a copy of any proposed ordinance that might impact farming operations to the department at least 90 days prior to the meeting of the body that would enact that ordinance. So they send those ordinance to the department, usually I'm the one who reviews them depending on what it is. So we review that ordinance and we will send a letter to that municipality and advise them if in fact that ordinance would restrict or prohibit the use of best management practices in our opinion. Now, the municipality can still enact that ordinance the way they originally sent it to us if they want to. We do not restrict them from doing that. However, if the issue goes to court, it's likely that the farmer is going to prevail and the municipality will not. I've been in a situation with that where I've been subpoenaed to court. The municipality was not in conformance with what they were supposed to be doing. When the town attorney found out that someone was there from the Department of Agriculture to defend the farmer, the case was dismissed. So it does work. So what does it really mean to have right to farm protection? Well, upon investigation of a complaint, the department determines the farm is operating in conformance with applicable BMPs and laws. If the complainant is still unsatisfied, the department will testify for the farmer in his behalf in court. That's essentially partly what it means, at least. So we cannot provide any legal counsel or pay any legal fees for the farmer. So we get some questions now and then from various farms, particularly small farms, and this is one of them. If I own a small farm, a complaint filed against me, will the ag compliance officer come out and investigate me? So the compliance program essentially focuses on resolving issues on commercial farms. And there's a number of definitions of farm, but in this case, we call it farm as the land, buildings, and machinery used in the commercial production of farm products. We define commercial production as production by a farm of one or more farm products or services that are sold, bartered, or otherwise exchanged for compensation and generates a cash or in-kind annual income of at least $2,000. So at least $2,000 tends to be a fairly strong criterion that is used. So many small farms don't meet that criterion, but we always strive to assist them, and I don't know of any farm that's been denied service from the Ag Compliance Program that has applied for assistance for guidance on what they're doing on their operation. In fact, we encourage them to do that. We want to help them and make sure they're doing what they need to be doing. So as I said, the right to farm protection may not apply directly to everybody, but we still try to help them out. Complaints regarding improper manure handling will always be investigated. We have a number of statutes that allow us to do that. We consider manure issues to be important issues, especially when it comes to protection of rivers, streams, and so on and so forth. So, ag compliance officer inspect my farms, no one's filed a complaint. Well, the answer is probably no, because the complaint program is, the ag compliance program is complaint driven. We have 2 guys who cover the entire state. So they're pretty busy most of the time, and they're working with other things, often besides complaints, usually. So again, exception does occur if there are water quality issues. There will be inspections of farms if they're applying for livestock operation permit, so we go out there. Usually I'm the one doing those inspections, so we go out and make sure they're in conformance with their nutrient management plan that they're required to have. So sometimes the farmer says, I've been here forever, I've been here for years, and I do my best to be kind to my neighbors and do what I'm supposed to do, yet they still seem to complain about me, either because they just don't seem to like the fact that I'm here, or they just don't like farming. So what happens then? So again, as I sort of intimated earlier, the compliance officer will investigate those complaints and determine if a legitimate complaint exists, and they will sort out the ones that are legitimate from those that are frivolous, and they're pretty good at that. It's pretty easy to figure that out pretty quickly. So I don't know how relevant this is, but I put it in because it is in that statute that there is a good faith provision in the law that has implications for individuals who bring private actions against a farmer and a judge determines that it was not brought in good faith, but it was just brought as a frivolous matter and not an intended only harassment. So fines can be levied. I've never known of it to happen. So one thing that's happened, as we all know, is we live in a more urbanized society now. People are moving into the country. They want that farm type of relationship, but they don't always like it when the manure spreads manure out there and it smells for a few days, or when the vacuum pump starts dairy farm at 4 o'clock in the morning, then farm life doesn't look quite so enticing. But that's one reason why we have various programs such as the Ag Trade Show in January. We have Open Farm Day. We have a number of other programs to try to not only educate the farmers on things that they need to be doing, but also to educate the farmer as well. So we think that the Ag Compliance Program, coupled with the Maine Agricultural Protection Act, have certainly created an effective working relationship between the Farm Department and other state and federal agencies, and we think it's worked pretty well over the years. It's been around for quite a while now, as mentioned earlier, and it seems to be working well. So that's pretty much what I have on that. Hopefully that was somewhat useful for you.
Mark, thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark.
Sure.
Does anybody on the panel have any questions? If you do, please raise your hand. Rebecca Graham.
Thank you, Don. Hello, everyone. I'm sorry I couldn't make that first meeting, but I trust that Kate filled in quite well for me. My questions are about a couple of things. One, are generally the farmers that you're dealing with also the owners of the property? Or would you have instances where a farm operator that you would receive a complaint for farm operators that may be operating in multiple different areas as a contractor?
Well, it's usually the farmers who own the property. On occasion, they'll have a couple of operations in different locations, but often that's still the same person.
And on the interface with the urban farming and regulation restrictions, many communities are regulated communities, so they have more stringent standards as a result of other permit obligations and water quality obligations. Does the department interface or change those BMPs based upon that location and or is that a factor? I know that DEP sets those BMPs. Are you interfacing quite frequently between DEP to redevelop and redefine those in specific areas in regulated communities?
No, not really. What we do is we come up with best management practices that are going to meet the need, that are going to meet that regulation.
So that the nutrient management aspect, which might be more in future stringent in a lot of those regulated communities, that gets reviewed on a regular basis for meeting that full compliance, or is it just kind of one uniform nutrient management program?
Well, it's fairly uniform, but I mean, we update our rules from time. We've updated the nutrient management rule a couple of years ago to well, just change some things that were no longer relevant and to bring some other things in that were more relevant. In terms of the water quality issues, livestock in streams, that kind of thing, trying to keep livestock out of the streams. And we had a section on compost management plans, a fairly large section. More and more farms are doing composting now for various reasons. Generally, when we review those proposals, we don't like to tell a municipality what to do necessarily. We believe that they should be dealing with the home rule thing, so to speak, and doing what they want to do in the community, as long as it doesn't outrageously infringe on farming operations. So we're going to look at that and from that standpoint.
Yeah, there are lots of also
Yeah.
there are lots of locally adopted right to farm ordinances as well. Municipalities that are trying to protect farms locally and also creating local programs for that protection based upon that relationship piece, I think, that you had pointed out. Do you find those to interfere with the department's work in any way?
No, haven't seen that yet.
Thanks.
Sure.
Thanks, Rebecca. Heather.
Thanks everybody, and thanks Mark for the presentation. I really appreciate the time that you put into it, and I had a little bit of trouble with my connection early on in the program, and I wondered if you had talked about the number of complaints that you deal with each year or since 1981. Like, is there a report kind of summarizing how frequently you have to like launch into action? And I'm also curious about like what the impetus was for this. I mean, you gave some examples, some general themes of the kind of complaints that you deal with, but was there like just a sort of an onslaught of complaints back in the early 80s or in the late 70s that really was the catalyst for the establishment of this department or this program?
Well, I think I wasn't around then, but I think that's probably the case. The nutrient management program started back around 1998 when certain farms were required to develop nutrient management plans, and certain ones had to do livestock operations permits and that kind of thing. And part of the impetus of that was a bunch of people got together. It was really an initiative of farmers themselves. Farmers got together, Soil and Water Conservation District, Department of Ag, Cooperative Extension, Natural Resources Conservation Service, and you can see the handwriting on the wall that they would be, based on what was going on in other states, in some cases, that environmentalism and environmental protection was an up-and-coming thing. And it was important to make sure that we have clean water and clean air, et cetera, et cetera. And they could see that there were going to be more and more regulations coming down the road if they didn't step it, I'll say, pre-regulate themselves. So they said, well, let's do our own regulation, because we understand what farmers' problems are, what's required on the farm, what we need to do. We would rather do this in our own state rather than say have EPA coming in here and imposing restrictions on us, people who don't know anything about Maine or necessarily about our agricultural operations. So that was part of what got the nutrient management program going. Now, what got the Right Farm program going, I think it was, from what I've been told historically, is that, yeah, there were issues coming up, and farms were being challenged, I'll use that word, I guess, challenged by municipalities or neighbors or by others, and they needed some protection from those challenges to maintain their operations. As far as numbers, yeah, the data are kept, and we were running some years ago 170, 180, 190 complaints a year, and that included provisions. I don't know what it's running. I used to manage the program, I don't anymore, but I work with them fairly closely, but exactly how many complaints are coming in, I don't know all the time, but that information could be gained. I know they're out there all the time looking at issues or various issues.
Yeah, that's 170 a year for 2 people. That's a lot of work. It would be interesting to know what it is.
Well, I'm that now, but you know.
That would be great to have. Is that information publicly available? I know that the Board of Pesticides Control, keeps a record of all the complaints and.
Yeah, sure. That's public information.
Is that posted, or is it just, do you have to file a request for that?
Well, we used to do an annual nutrient management report to the legislature, and that information was in there at the time, but long story short, it was decided that the report no longer needed to be developed, so it's no longer developed, but the information is Ag Compliance Program has that information.
Well, I think it would be great to just have a better idea of how, I know that this is informative for the stakeholder group that's working on this, that's focused more on forestry, but it would be interesting to know how much pressure is on the department to deal with this at this point, generally speaking.
Sure.
Thank you.
Hey, does anybody else have any questions?
I just have a question, Mark. So, in these complaints with farming concerns, has it come up woodlot issues at all, woodland ownership issues in any of those complaints?
Yeah, occasionally. Yeah, usually, often they'd be shoreline zoning issues, mostly harvesting issues for the most part, that we run up again.
Harvesting issues such as water?
Well, in shoreline zoning issue,
okay.
people in complaints say so-and-so's cutting trees, and I don't think they should be cutting the trees down.
Yeah,
Mostly, that's mostly what they, yeah.
And do you keep track of that along with is that
Well,
noted?
yeah, the compliance program would have that, yeah. I don't have it, but.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Sure.
Heather, do you still have your hand up? You're muted.
Sorry, I couldn't see the contrast on my screen. I thought I had lowered my hand, but I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay, Will Coley, you raising your hand? Go ahead, you're on mute.
You're on mute, Will, there you go.
Okay.
It sounds like an exact parallel to what you're trying to attempt here with the forestry. My question is, in the existing law, is it real specific on crop? I mean, we already have a standard of BMPs. We already have, it's an agricultural, it really is agricultural. It's just how long it takes to grow the crop. And how easy, wouldn't it be easier to adopt the language to the existing law than try to write a new one?
Probably could. You have to change the statute, I believe, but I think you can do that.
Yeah, well,
I'm not the lawyer, so I'm probably the wrong person to ask, so I'm giving you legal advice now, but.
Well, in the Agriculture Protection Act, it specifically says this exempts forestry or forest operations.
Yeah.
So the question still remains, why that was done. You know, what was the process that, at that time of this Protection Act, that forestry was specifically exempted, in the language? And I can't answer that. I don't know why.
Yeah, I don't either.
It may be something to revisit because agriculture and forestry have become much more, even in the state's eyes, more of one organization in a sense. I know there's differences, but you know, there's been a lot of combining those because the ag side has done a better job at holding back, so to speak. But it's an exact parallel, you know, BMPs and things like that. And really what it appears is they're just trying to mandate you can't outlaw science and law just because you don't like the smell, sound, or look of something. And it just seems like it's a pretty simple fix by re-identifying crop. I would revisit it that way.
So noted.
Okay, if there are no other questions. Oh, Tom Doak, you got your hand up, sorry.
I think I can answer the question of why forestry was exempt. That was around the time all the forestry referendums are going on, and I'm guessing that nobody wanted to get into the, you know, to another fight around that issue. So that's my guess why that was explicitly. The only I had a quick question about the provision that Mark, I think it's like the good faith.
Yeah.
Whatever it was, that you know, that basically says if I understood it right, if someone brings a suit against a farmer, and you believe it's a frivolous suit, if the person goes to court, if the person takes the farmer to court, if it's found to be frivolous, then there's some penalty for the person bringing the suit. Is that how it works, roughly?
Yeah, well, if the judge finds that it was brought, if it's a frivolous, it was just brought to be, you know, to harass the farmer, the judge can impose fines or whatever on that person. But it's never been done. Never been done.
So is that effective? Is that, in your view, just not worthwhile to have considered, or does that provision kind of prevent those things from happening in the first place? Because, and I use the example of the liability law in Maine about saying if you're injured on somebody's land recreating it, the landowner isn't responsible unless they've done something, you know, that they know will hurt somebody. And if they do bring the suit, when they lose, in this case, the court must order the person who brought the suit to pay the cost of the person defending themselves. So what the effect of it is, I think there's only been like 6 or 7 cases in 35 or 40 years that have actually gone to court because of that provision. So is this keeping suits out of the court, or is this just not useful? Do you have a sense of that?
I don't think it, we have very few go to court, very few. So I don't think it's relevant.
Okay, if there's no other questions, thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Welcome.
I'm going to turn the podium over to Peter Coughlin at the Department of Transportation, Local Road Program.
So I'm wondering, can you hear me now?
Yes, perfectly.
Wow. I don't know what I did differently, but nothing different from a half an hour ago, but now it's working. So you can all hear me okay? Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. I know a lot of people here. My name is Pete Coughlin. I've been with DOT for 44 years. By the way, when I got this laptop a couple years ago, for some reason it didn't come with a camera on it. So I have a portable one, which I left in the office yesterday. So I'm at home right now and I don't have the camera. Anyway, the Local Road Center is a federal highway program. There is one in every state. We happen to be based at DOT here in Maine, whereas in New Hampshire, it's at UNH. Vermont happens to be at the DOT, but Cornell's in New York, and most of them are university-based. But we're based here in Maine. We're one of about a dozen centers across the country that are based at a DOT. And our primary function as a federal program, which is called the Local Technical Assistance Program, or LTAP. We use a friendlier name called the Maine Local Road Center. It's all the same stuff. But I took this over back in 1986. So I've been doing this for 35 years, and primary mission here is to provide training and technical assistance to all local customers in the state of Maine. So we, like Rebecca and MMA, we deal with all the towns in the state. A lot of towns, if anyone's been there for a while, they probably know me. I probably know them. Having done this for a while, I meet a lot of people and make a lot of connections. We do a lot of training, a lot of workshops, talk to a lot of people on the phone, provide technical assistance every day. I have been working with Maine Municipal since the beginning. I provide road technical advice, and they provide everything else. And if they have road questions that come in over there, lots of times people tell me all the time, yeah, MMA sent me over to you. So we work together a lot. I also, just FYI, I'm a municipal official myself. I wear about 12 different hats in 5 different towns. I wear 6 right here in Randolph, but I do a lot of town websites, and I'm very familiar with local government because that's what I do. So the training that we do around the state is on virtually every subject. I mean, we've done, let me just name off a few here. Over the years, we've done training on gravel road maintenance. We did a grader training program for years where we trained municipal grader operators to better help them to better grade roads. I'll always say there's a big difference between a grader driver and a grader operator. Those are hard to come by these days. But gravel road maintenance is still a big thing in Maine because we still have lots of gravel roads. We do training on bridges and bridge maintenance and paving and how to, I still hear the term tar, how to tar a road. And I always ask people, how do you spell that? I hope it's T-A-H, because that's what we do here in Maine. We tar roads. But also deal with a lot of snow and ice control training. In fact, we haven't really been on the road for a year and a half, and we are about to go on the road starting next week to do some snow and ice control training for local operators. There's a huge turnover in the guys and gals that are plowing our roads, and lots of them have not had, some of them had no training. And I think we've got like 300 people already signed up for about 25 sessions around the state. Very popular program. We do programs on drainage and how to put culverts in right, how to put guardrail in right. We also serve as conduit for towns who want to buy their salt through a state contract. So we work with all of them and find out, do you want to go through a state contract or not? A lot of them do, a lot of them don't. We run supervisory training for up and coming public works folks. We do, through Mike St. Peter, we do chainsaw training all across the state upon request from towns that need that. We have a software program called RSMS, which is Road System Management. It's a software program where towns can manage their road maintenance and capital improvement. In other words, they could put together a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan. For instance, if any of you go to town meeting and wonder how the road commissioner determines which roads are going to get fixed or paved or graveled or whatever, they really should have a plan, and we've been helping lots and lots of towns with that. It's a rather simple software, but it's very powerful, and we've had a lot of towns use that. Come springtime, as myself and MMA gets lots of calls on posted roads And obviously that's a big concern here in the farming and forestry business. Posted roads is something that DOT does in a limited amount of state, but there's still lots of towns that post roads. And most towns, I worked years ago with Mike over to MMA, and we updated the model ordinance that Maine Municipal has so that we had some consistency around the state. But posted roads is always a huge thing come spring, even starting in January sometimes. And so I get lots of calls on those things. Couple other things. Well, another program we did, in fact, Gary Fish is on the line here, I notice. We need to do this workshop again, but it was one called Trees, Weeds, and Roads. It was all about trees and invasive pests and invasive insects. And we wanted towns to be aware of some of the technical aspects of that. We had Colleen Turling and Jan Santier and Gary travel around the state with us to teach folks about all that stuff. And we really need to do that again because these insects and critters are becoming more and more common. We also have a couple side things that we offer. We have a fella on board that's called our Road Ranger, and we have another fella called our Bridge Ranger. And we've had Road Ranger for years. In fact, some of you might have known Phil Curtis up in Madison. Phil is still the road supervisor for the unorganized territory of Somerset County. And he provided training and technical assistance all over the state. He'd come to your garage, he'd do training, he'd go to selectmen's meeting, road committee meetings, whatever, and provide as much advice as he could. We now have a fellow named Paul Brown, and he, upon request, will go to any town and provide technical assistance on any sort of road problem, whether it's mud or pavement falling apart, or what do we do with this road? What do we do to it? It's that sort of thing that we can provide without a town having to spend money on an engineering firm to maybe come in and do something very similar. Jim, our Bridge Ranger, we just started him within the last year, and any town that has a minor span or a culvert or a bridge, those are inspected by DOT every 2 years if they're over 10 feet, and towns get the inspection reports. And lots of time, well, some towns have like 1 or 2, and others have 10 or 15. And when you get these reports, they can be a little hard to understand what they really say. So Jim is available to go out to a town and help them understand exactly what is good or bad about this culvert or this small bridge, and might give them some advice on options that they could use to repair the thing or rehab it or totally replace it. So I also work closely with the, all the public works folks in Maine are aligned, and many of them belong to the Maine chapter of the American Public Works Association, the APWA. I'm on their board and have been for a couple decades, and they have a listserv where they talk to each other. They provide training and technical assistance too, and we run a big highway congress up in Skowhegan every June, and we usually have 1,000 people show up there with 100 vendors. And it's all about roads and bridges and maintenance and plowing and all that good stuff. So that's really a quick nutshell thing about what we do. And we're really busy. By the way, the local road center is me, Tammy, Carrie, and I got a vacant position right now, and then 2 road ranger folks. So we're a small operation. Most of the LTAPs in every other state, like over in New Hampshire, they've got 2 folks. Vermont's got 2, Cornell's got like 6. So we're busy all the time. And what keeps us busy is the constant turnover on town levels. As you know, selectmen, road commissioners, town managers are moving all the time, whether it's appointed or elected. And so we're constantly busy with requests coming in all the time. So I'm not sure how that relates to this subject here. I know you guys wanted to know basically what we do, but I haven't done this for so long. And as Rebecca knows, the Maine Municipal Convention is next next Thursday, Friday. We've had a booth there, and I think we may be the only booth the only vendor that has been there as long as I have. I mean, this is going to be like our 35th or 36th year at the convention. So to me, this is all about building relationships and working with the local folks that are in charge of roads around the state of Maine. So I've had calls on virtually every subject. I may not be an expert, but I knew who to put them in touch with if I had to. I got a lot of contacts around the state and work with a lot of people. So I guess I'll stop right there and see if anyone's got any questions.
Peter, thank you. This is awesome. I think folks on the panel should take advantage of all your institutional knowledge here. So I see Paul's hand is up. You're on.
Yeah, can you hear me, Don?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Just a quick question related to, I think you said the gentleman's name was Paul Brown. Who's,
yeah.
Okay, that's willing to come to municipalities and talk about these issues. I find a lot of time that road postings sometimes aren't based in science, the way that they're posted and not posted.
Yeah.
Is that something that he would come to, let's say, a public works director in a municipality and talk about or look at some of the roads and make suggestions?
He could, but it would be better if I did that.
Okay.
Because Paul doesn't have. I remember starting to deal with posted roads back when I first started this in 1987, and I've been working with it ever since. I'm, other than MMA, myself, and a couple people at DOT, I'm the one that pretty much has the most experience on this stuff. And I guess I'd prefer to come do that rather than Paul, because Paul, even though he lives down in Berwick, and he knows his road stuff, he's not as familiar with Maine law and the statute and the model ordinance and the rules and the exemptions and all that stuff that goes behind it. And that's really what lots of times it comes down to, is those details.
Thank you. I'm asking, just for your information, I'm asking for two reasons. One, as a forester, and two, as the vice chair of the New Gloucester Select Board. So thank you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no problem. I know Ted.
Yep.
Ted for years down there as the public works guy. So yeah, I'd be more than happy to come down, just touch base with me sometime, and I can do that.
It's just a good practice. It seems like, from my harvesting experience, that sometimes roads are posted abruptly when they weren't before, when you start an operation, because of complaints by the neighbors. And it really messes up once you get equipment moved and then the road's posted. When you get in there, it really messes up trying to remove that equipment. Some municipalities allow you to move in the cold, to move that equipment. Some will not. So, some guidelines like that, I think, not just in my community, but some other communities, would be very helpful, especially when we're coordinating. In most cases, we talk to the public works director or road commissioner before starting a job, and then you start the job and the road gets posted and you're stuck. It's just not a fun situation.
Yeah, and obviously we could talk about posted roads for a couple hours here, and we're not going to do that. But as you know, with Maine having about 485 organized municipalities, home rule exists, and anybody can set their own rules, weights, exemptions, and all that stuff. But most people, and I direct them all to the model ordinance, which is probably most towns have. Well, I don't want to say most towns, but any town that has an ordinance on posted roads generally uses the MMA model. But you can change that to whatever you want to. It's just simply a model. So the practices that occur in a town many times is based on what the guy next door is doing, because many towns work together to do this kind of as a regional thing, and they also look to the state. If the state's posting in the area, they'll look at what the state's doing. But as far as a technical approach, I've been pushing for the last couple of years. There's a great little, it's on our website. It's a map of the state of Maine that looks at temperatures every day, and it determines what's solidly frozen and what's thawing out. And this thing changes daily. And we've been pushing that at public works meetings and our training sessions for towns to at least look at. You do what you want to, but at least it gives you some information on when things are starting to thaw out, so that there may be some consistency from town to town or region to region. But the bottom line is, it comes down to what a town wants to do and its road conditions. Obviously, those are different from town to town. Some are gravel, some are paved, some are built over nothing, some are built on good gravel bases, so it changes everywhere. So there's a wide variety in why, how roads get posted. But I've always been a promoter of trying to be consistent so that it doesn't create problems for people trying to move commodity around the state, because it can get really, really difficult. All you're looking at is the orange signs out there, and I don't think anyone gets out and reads the fine print on those things. But it's trying to be consistent, but then again, everybody can control what they want to do. And that could be the road commissioner, it could be the board of selectmen. Who knows? Everybody different is going to make a decision like that, and that's what it's all about. It's local control.
Thank you very much. That consistency is what I was thinking about. And you're right, that up-to-date information that you have is really good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Paul. Heather, you've got a question?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. That was a really great presentation, and I learned a lot, and I appreciate that. It seems like it's a very collaborative and proactive approach that you've had, and the relationship building that you've done with MMA and the municipalities is impressive. And I feel like, when the public hearing happened on the bill that was heard in the last session, it became clear that there are processes and required processes for adopting new ordinances relating to forestry. They're on the books, but the challenge seems to be what we've been hearing is that a lot of municipalities don't know about them, or maybe more outreach and education could be done. And I wonder, it sounds like that's really what you're all about. And if my hope is that we can do more to raise awareness about what we already have on the books, rather than coming up with another law that would basically emulate the Right to Farm Act, which the presentation seems that it really is to to defend agricultural practices and protect them from local ordinances. So I guess I just wondered if you have any suggestions for, how we can do more to make sure that all municipalities in Maine understand what is already on the books.
Yeah, well, as Rebecca full knows, most towns in Maine are members of MMA, and they have tons of resources. I'm not even going to start naming them, but most towns belong to them and look to them and rely on them for any sort of advice and consent. And they have a legal division that takes calls every day. They're buried. So they're really a good source, and they do tons of training around the state on lots of different subjects that I've done joint sessions with them a lot. And we try to do what we can, but you got to realize that, and I remember this from day one when I started back in 1987, out of the almost 500 towns in the state of Maine, 90% of them have less than 5,000 people in them. and 50% of those towns have about less than 1,000. We're a small town state. Sure, we've got Bangor, Brewer, Augusta, Portland, and all those things, but the town is made up of the Buckfields and the Litchfields and the Montvilles of the world. And it's part-time selectmen and town managers that run these things, and they're very, very busy, and trying to keep track of everything they need to keep track of is a heck of a job. And the rotation is constant. So that's just the nature of local government in Maine, and whether it's Maine Municipal or us or DEP, there's a lot of effort to help folks out there. I can hear there's some towns in Maine I've never heard from, but when a new board of selectmen comes in or a new road commissioner comes in, many times I'll hear from them for the first time, and then I've got them hooked because they keep calling me back looking for advice. Finally, it's just turnover is a big thing here in Maine, and people coming and going. Everything they've learned and everything they've got through training now just went out the door, and someone else comes in. So that's what makes this job fun. I've been doing this 44 years, and I still love going to work every day. My wife keeps telling me to retire, and I don't want to. But it's fun because there's lots of turnover.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay, I'm not seeing anything. Peter, thank you very much for taking the
Welcome.
time.
Any way I can help, get a hold of me.
We appreciate it. Okay, so folks, we're going to take a 10-minute break. It's now 10:11, so at 10:21 we'll come back and we will go to a presentation from Paul Larrabee. All righty? Okay, welcome back, everybody. I just wanted to remind the folks who are not members of the work group that you will all be on mute until it's time for public comment. At that point, if you have a question or comment, please raise your hand and we'll recognize you. So with that, I'm going to turn the podium over to Paul Larrabee, who's a consulting forester down in southern Maine. And he recently worked with the town of Sweden on a municipal forestry ordinance. And I will let Paul tell his story.
Hold on, Don. I'll get everything working here.
Okay.
See if I can get the cameras in. Am I on?
I can see you and we can hear you.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I know there's some new people here, so I'll introduce myself briefly. Like Peter said earlier, I wear many hats. I'll try to explain the hats. I started my career as a consultant for a short time, and in 2001 I was a district forester for the Maine Forest Service, in which I covered Cumberland, Androscoggin, and Saginaw counties at that time. And then in, I think it was 2006, I became the Southern Regional Enforcement Coordinator for the Maine Forest Service, overseeing coordination of the Forest Practices Act and liquidation. I did that up until I think 2010. My experience, I have experience with the forestry laws of Maine from an enforcement standpoint and from working on crafting some of them with Don. And now I'm a private consultant forester, vice chair of the New Gloucester Select Board, on the Land Management Planning Committee as a liaison, and the Environmental Committee in town. I'm the contract forester for Cumberland, Falmouth, and North Yarmouth in those municipalities as well. So that's a little bit about my background, and I've been the county chair for the Maine Tree Farm Committee since Greg Foster temporarily gave it to me back in 2003 or 4. Thanks, Greg. been a long temporary role.
Anytime.
Yeah. Okay. So what I'm gonna talk about, and this, I don't have a formal presentation, Don. I've had several late meetings this week, but I'm gonna talk a little bit. I'm gonna try to share my screen, and then I'm gonna talk a little bit about. Bear with me. I'm not that familiar with Teams, but here we go. Let's try this. Can everybody see that?
It's coming up. Hang on.
Okay,
Yes.
sorry.
Yep, it's up.
Okay. Just some because I can't see any of you now, but just some background. This is, I'll scroll to the top, and I'm hoping this scrolls with me. Like I said, I'm new to Teams, okay? So this is the Town of Sweden, Maine Zoning and Land Use Ordinance 2009, okay? And so I got enrolled in this, or involved in this project, as what usually happens. There was some timber harvesting activity in the town that was upset people, and we had to, the Maine Forest Service was called in several times, but it was related to their ordinance, the municipality's ordinance. And I'll, what happened was there was some timber harvesting that occurred, and that's kind of what I knew at the time, and people were upset about it. So Sweden was not a statewide standards town, which means that they did not adopt statewide standards for water quality related to timber harvesting, which meant their code officer was charged with the enforcement of their ordinance. Also, getting more into the problem, what we learned was a lot of the problem was based around tree removal for uses other than forest management. And when I say that, what I mean is, when you see trees being cut, that doesn't mean it's forest management activities. Trees being cut could be clearing for a change of land use, as we call it, view establishment, creation of agricultural fields, development. Those are not forest management activities. Those are change of land use activities. And it's important when you start this process to differentiate the two, what the issue is, because there really is a difference between change of land use harvesting and forest management harvesting. So anyway, we started into the process. I started into the process. Mike Morse was involved, former DEP, as well as Lakes Environmental Association. We were all involved. And we were working on basically shoreline zone adoption, whether or not to adopt statewide standards. So we got, we did a lot of work. We talked a lot about statewide standards. Their code officer, currently their code officer is available the second and fourth Tuesday of the month for 4 hours. So that's the only availability of a code officer in Sweden right now. Small town. So anyway, with Mike and I, we worked through and explained, had meetings talking about statewide standards and what adopting statewide standards for harvesting near in the shoreline zone would do for the municipality as far as bringing in the resources of the Maine Forest Service to help with the enforcement. Don Mancius, I brought Don in at the process at that point. And Tom, the water quality specialist, to work with them on helping get statewide standards drafted in their ordinance. In the process of that, we took a look at timber harvesting, and I've got timber harvesting up right now, and for what you can see in here is they have actually got more than most municipalities do as related to regulating timber harvesting. So this made me a little bit concerned because of the enforcement issue and how this would be enforced. The permit was required. They put that right in timber harvesting. And so all new entrances onto public roadways for harvesting needed a permit from the code officer. But what's interesting is if you look at the harvesting procedures, this is for all areas, okay? This is not this is not shoreland zone. This is not adjacent to water bodies. This is all other areas. They are really prescriptive. No more than 65% of the total volume of trees 4 inches or more in diameter measured at 4.5 feet above the ground above the ground level, and shall not create single openings in forest canopy greater than 220,000 square feet, which is approximately 5 acres. And they accepted the shoreland zone. What concerned me even more about this is large single openings are permitted for agriculture, pasture, approved roads, development, and for necessary clearance salvage operations connected with disaster, blowdowns, or disease infestation. No single openings for timber harvesting shall be, single openings for timber harvesting shall be separated from one another and from any public roadway by a minimum of 100-foot buffer. So that one, my discussion with them, for those of us involved in timber harvesting, is who is the one charged with determining the 65% in the municipality on the removal from an enforcement standpoint. That one becomes, and it hasn't been done. It hasn't been done, but it becomes problematic from an enforcement standpoint, because they're going to have to hire outside staff to, and you would have to have pre-harvest volume levels and know what was caught. You'd have to do a stump tally or an inventory of it. So from my standpoint, it was problematic from a small community, and they had defined clear cutting basically is what they're doing, and is defining clear cutting right here under definitions. And I don't know how quickly this will scroll, but they have defined clear cutting, which is very different than how the state has defined it. If you guys can see that in timber harvesting, the non-selective cutting of trees that leaves less than 35% of the original volumes of trees, which is very problematic. I don't know how you would enforce that either. So, basically what happened was, and I'll talk more about it, but we ended up having a lot more discussion about timber harvesting for all areas, and how, had this been used, how it was used. And in some of their ordinances were less strict than state standards. Several of them actually were less strict than state standards. So we worked through all of these. I came up with recommendations, and getting to the bottom of it, what I figured out is the biggest issue in the municipality was tree removal associated with water bodies near residential dwellings, if that makes sense, near camps, that had upset a lot of people, and also change of land use, not timber harvesting. Okay, so we worked through, for those of you who work in municipalities with harvesting, looking, unless you start digging through the ordinances here, I think you could probably argue that a lot of the harvesting and the management in Sweden since 2009 has probably violated one of these in some way. Okay. They had one case, I can give you an example of it. They had one case where they felt it had violated their ordinance. They did not hire a forester to review the harvest. The planning board on the enforcement side of it allowed the violator to make a donation to the food pantry, and it was over. So what I talked a lot about this when we were talking about this is this ordinance creates a hardship for those landowners in Sweden that are trying to do things the right way, especially if it's not being enforced. And so anyway, we talked a lot about sprawl related to this and how they did not want their woodland owners to have to sell their properties. And so in the end, the draft, and I'm going to see if I can bring this up again. Okay. I've got to change the screen. Okay, let's go here. Okay. Now, let me know if that, Dawn, the Word document is up now.
You got it.
Okay, so timber harvesting, the most recent draft that will go to public comment in Sweden has been dramatically changed. And you can see timber harvesting procedures for all areas. All timber harvesting activities in Sweden must comply with Maine state law. All questions about compliance with Maine state law should be referred to the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. And what that did is that opened all of these ordinances they had here that they had created. They had called several times on the Maine Forest Service to help them enforce, which the Maine Forest Service can't enforce ordinance. So what this does is now what they felt, and Don and I were talking to them, is it brings the resources of the Maine Forest Service to the municipality, who only has a code officer about eight hours a month in that town. Anyway, shoreline zone, they've worked with Tom Gilbert to clarify statewide standards in their ordinance. I believe the meeting is this weekend. The public hearing in Sweden is this weekend related to these changes. So anyway, this was just a brief introduction. There was a lot of time was put into all the ordinances with myself, Mike Morse, Lakes Environmental Association on phosphorus control plans. So a lot of work was into it. But what I think the important thing coming out of sorry, I'm getting a message here. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. What the important thing coming out of all the work that we did is a lot of the problems that were perceived as timber harvesting were actually not timber harvesting. It was related to the use that was going to be coming after timber harvesting. So if you're not familiar with Sweden, it is a beautiful rolling country. And it offers the ability for some really spectacular views. And a lot of the newer development had been capitalizing on those view areas. And those harvests were related to view increasing. And also a lot of their smaller camps that were on water bodies had been bought recently, and trees were being cut in the shoreline zone, and it was really opening up the shoreline zone. So this basically started this process, and the secretary of the planning board knew enough that when they started this process that they needed outside help. They couldn't do it themselves, and they started with Lakes Environmental Association, who is one of my clients in Bridgeton, and needed a forester, and then brought in Mike Morse too. So it worked out really well. The key being they've now forged a new relationship as well with the Maine Forest Service, both the district forester and the forest rangers on site. So they have coordinated that with the new code enforcement officer, who is Renee Carter, who has retired and moved from Naples to Sweden just recently. So it's forged a new relationship, and now they have assistance with their timber harvesting, and it doesn't put an undue hardship on the landowners, the small landowners in Sweden, who are trying to manage under that ordinance when other people weren't. So anyway, just Dawn, I had a question about that. That ordinance was dated 2009. I was the REC in 2009 for the Maine Forest Service. I don't remember ever seeing that coming to the department for review under the forest practices law, but I could be wrong.
No, we have no record of the town ever consulting with us on that.
Right. So, I mean, that's one thing, just like the farm ordinances, timber harvesting ordinances are supposed to come to the department for review by staff prior to being implemented in the municipalities. That one surprised me, Don, because I had not seen that before, and I'd actually done some work in Sweden. Yeah. Another one that is my own town, which I will share right now. Let's see if I can do this, which hopefully that comes up. This is the town which I live, work. This is 1986, which I found digging in the ordinances. I thought A was interesting. No permit is required for cutting and removal of up to 10 cords of 5,000 board feet of wood for personal use in any calendar year. So that's saying basically a permit is required from the municipality if you go over 10 cords or 5,000 feet in New Gloucester. They have slash law, which the state has a slash law. No timber harvesting operations or stockpiling will take place in the town right away. I guess that means no landings or tree cutting will happen in the right of way. Anyway, so what, I guess the point in all this, you know, not to belabor the point, but the point in all of this is for those of us that are practicing forestry in Maine, you really have to do your homework. You have to take a deep dive on municipal ordinances in some cases to make sure that you are not putting your clients at risk. You know, and municipalities, when they pass some of these ordinances, had the best interest of the citizens in mind. I agree with that. But the way that they were written and the science wasn't behind the way that it was written. It was usually a reaction to a problem when they were written. You know, arbitrary numbers like 65%. I mean, that's a difficult one to enforce as well without, you know, pre-harvest volumes and post-harvest cruising. So it's costly to enforce those as well. And at the same time, they can't get assistance from the Maine Forest Service on enforcing those. So basically what I'm saying is if, you know, working with municipalities, another municipality, I sent Dawn a bunch of municipalities that I've dealt with that have ordinances related to timber harvesting, whether it's South Berwick with, you know, no more than, I think it's 50% Dawn on anywhere in South Berwick. And then York requires a building permit in the town of York, which is the last one I've been worked down there in years, but it was $1,000 to file a building permit to do a timber harvest on a storm damage. So, you know, some of these things discourage, I guess my point is some of these things discourage forest ownership, and they frustrate landowners. I work in an area that is under extreme development potential. You know, and if you can look around Cumberland and Falmouth, the developments are popping up everywhere because of the land values. Cumberland also requires steps to harvest wood in their municipality beyond state. Permitting, harvest plan, code officer. So my point with all this is, you know, I think if we can continue to educate municipalities on the laws that exist, and then show them how the laws work and the resources available, I don't want us discouraging forest landowners to keep their land and becoming frustrated with trying to enforce standards or ordinances that make no sense. And I think, you know, looking at Sweden, that's a very difficult one for a landowner to try to comply with. And from Sweden's standpoint, from an enforcement standpoint, you know, when they say, you know, in their ordinance, large single openings are permitted for agriculture, pasture, approved roads and development, and for necessary clearance salvage operations connected with disaster, blowdown, or disease infestation. Who's confirming the disease infestation or the insect outbreak on that? It's very hard to enforce a standard like that, because it's wide open at that point. So yeah, basically, I don't want to belabor the point. This is our experience in Sweden was good because we brought in a lot of professional help, worked with the planning board, worked with the secretary to work on an ordinance that meets their needs. And I think it's this Saturday, we'll find out if the, you know, public comment period, if it's accepted. And does anybody have any questions? I work a lot with local ordinances. And I know they're everywhere. Dawn, I sent you just a partial list of what I've worked through in ordinances. What's difficult, and I can tell you from experience, what's difficult is to comply with a local ordinance in a municipality, which I will not name, prepare a harvest plan, mark the stand to their standards, and then have the lot next door cut a lot harder because they didn't know the standards. And nobody enforces the standards in the municipality because they don't have the professional expertise. That is a frustrating situation to be in for a landowner. When I'm telling the landowner, I'm sorry, you can't cut any more trees. And then the neighbor cuts a lot more trees. So it's a difficult situation. And it's, if you're going to have ordinances, and you need to be able to enforce them, because if you can't, it creates an unfair advantage between landowners. Don, with that, I'm take any questions if people have questions, or if you have questions or anything like that.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I just wanted to add that in the Sweden example, it's unlikely that we would have found out about the existence of this ordinance had you and Mike Morse not contacted the Maine Forest Service for help with the shoreline zoning stuff. Nathan Wadsworth and then Will Cole.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to piggyback on about the Sweden example. We manage a lot of clients' land in Sweden. It's very difficult. My father and his business partner bought 300 acres of land in Sweden in 2002. And last year we decided to sell it because we were so sick of dealing with the town. And you know, the person that bought that's from Massachusetts, and they're planning on building a couple homes in there now. So I would just say ordinances like that, they force people to sell their land, and maybe not the desired outcome that we really want in the state. So just an example that is a real case.
Thank you, Nathan. Will.
Yeah, a couple of, I guess, a question and a comment. I'll start with the comment. We did a harvest for the main tree last year in the town of Aroostook, and they actually have a point system for road frontage, the same way they do lake frontage, for, you know, rivers and things. And, you know, some of that land was almost inoperable because of those ridiculous ordinances. So I believe we were the first harvest in that town since way back when Pat cut in there, and how long ago that was, Pat, 20, 30 years ago. I don't think the town's done a single harvest since. So that's a comment just to add to this, you know, problem. But then the question is, the statewide standard, I thought I was either told or read that once you reach 80%, towns would lose that ability and they have to adopt. I don't know if that's true, and I don't even know where I heard it, but if that's the case and you met that, is any of this even necessary, this whole right to log issue? Because it sounds like if you went on a campaign and got the towns to get to that point, then we don't need to pass anything. But am I missing something?
Yeah, that's not correct. The towns that have their shoreline zoning ordinances, which are different from state minimums, those ordinances will stay in place. The issue for statewide standards is when we reach the critical mass of 200 and some odd towns, 252 I think it is, that we would need to initiate rulemaking for the statewide standards to apply in the unorganized territory. Paul, you got your hand up?
Yeah. Just to respond to Will. So just because a municipality is a statewide standards does not mean they wouldn't have their own ordinance. New Gloucester is a statewide standards town. Those ordinances are still enrolled in the, and then also Cumberland is the town of Cumberland is a statewide standards town that still has the permit requirement and a plan associated with that permit, which is a fee permit as well. So just because some of these municipalities have had these ordinances prior to, some of them are prior to Forest Practices Act on in '89, which they've stayed there even though they've adopted statewide standards.
Okay. Well, one follow-up comment, I guess it would be, back a while, Pat had asked the fellow from the agriculture about the potential repercussion for a frivolous lawsuit. I would like personally to see something in this bill that there's a repercussion to a town that exceeds state right standard in by way of taxes or something, because you are actually taking, it's a grab, it's a power grab of private property. And if you devalue that property, it ought to cost them something. When it costs somebody nothing to take somebody else's property, it's pretty easy to do. And there needs to be a repercussion for actions. And I think that's really ought to be part of the process here.
Okay, I got it. Thank you, Will. Are there any other questions from folks? Paul, you got your hand up again, and then Greg Foster.
And to just, I think when we look at these ordinances, I think people have lost the local knowledge of the value that forest land plays in the community. And when I say that, I think we need to have more of a discussion. Forest land isn't preservation land, okay? Because forest land, in order for landowners to maintain that land, and I am a small landowner, I'll put that hat on right now too in New Gloucester. In order to maintain that land, it has to help pay some of the taxes on it. And, you know, I think what we're getting used to is land being bought and then preserved and not managed. But we have to remind people, active forest management on land keeps land forested, period. It keeps land forested in southern Maine. When people get frustrated and cannot actively manage their land, it goes to a developer. And I see it every day with clients. So we need to reduce the frustration to manage forest land. That's the key. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Greg.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. That's really good. I've experienced the similar things that you have in towns I've worked in. And one thing that's a little frustrating to me is the code officers get the notification, and I can't think of any town that has ever notified me that has an ordinance that regulates timber harvesting above and beyond the Forest Practices Act. I don't think any code officer in my mind that I can recall has ever contacted me and said, we do have ordinances that are beyond the rules that are enforced by the Forest Service. And those guys, they take the form, they just chuck it in the file. And it seems to me if they're going to put an ordinance in place like they have, that they have some level of responsibility to notify people, landowners, the loggers, or whoever's find those notifications. And I did get in trouble in Yarmouth, and I saw that code officer twice before I did the timber sale, and I told him what I was doing. He never acknowledged anything about any, well, in this case, it was timber harvesting was not a permitted use in that particular zone. And the landowner had been approached many times by the town manager to develop that property. And so the landowner went ahead with the timber sale, and everything kind of melted down. There was lawsuit, but seems to me there was some level of responsibility by the town that didn't occur. And that's about all I got to say about that. So it's a thought. At least these code officers or planners ought to be advancing some level of responding to a notification that the town has rules in excess of the Forest Practices Act. That's it for now.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Got time for one more comment, Paul.
Sorry, to echo, just this is brief, to echo on what Greg is saying. For those of you that manage forest land, you have to look deep into the ordinances, because if a neighbor is upset about what you're doing and you look at permitted uses per the underlying zone in the ordinances, like what Greg had happen, Kittery is very similar. There is timber harvest is not allowed in all the zones. So even though you own forest land and you may be in tree growth tax law program in Kittery, forest management is not an allowed use in some of the zones there. So it's just something you've got to be aware of. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to skip over Greg. Rebecca, you had your hand up briefly. Did you have something?
I didn't want to cut in. My question is, the places that you're asking for notification, are you a resident? Because code enforcement or planning and ordinances all have a massive public process. So there is a legal requirement for that notification, but I'm not sure how a town would know about an operator within a community in order to do that. And my second comment is like the reigning theme that I'm hearing, and in Paul's amazing solution and activity, and thank you so much for that outreach, is specifically that. It is a lack of outreach, a lack of education that both the road system and the farming system have. Farmers have a relationship within their communities and they are permanent in there, whereas a lot of forestry operations may be transient, but also might not have been involved in that ordinance adoption purpose. And I'm sure that that community, Paul, was extremely helpful for you to actually walk through, how do I enforce this, so that they could get that, and that solved that issue. So there is that process, that we have that example of what works and how to change this and how to approach it. So what can we do out of this process rather than rolling over everyone, which, as we know in Maine, does not go down well, to make the education piece more predominant, to make the a model ordinance standard that would be easier for communities, but also recognizes the pressures that municipal officials have. And Lakes Environmental Association is a key partner in that, because a lot of these communities have severe water quality issues. And once you get an algae bloom, it's millions of dollars. So the shoreline zoning restrictions are in place, and there is that lack of distinction between, you know, a harvesting operation and cutting for shoreland. But a lot of communities know what that cost is when that lake gets an algae bloom. So there's a lot of fear around that. And there's a lot of reason why those standards, because they're getting pressure from environmental groups, are more strict within those zones. So there's also the competing interest piece. And that's where I think there would a central agency or an entity like local roads would be a better option to be that mitigator, to triage all of that stuff and to help this process with education and outreach that are kind of inherent in operations where, like in farming, you have a relationship with your neighbor, and a lot of that neighborhood stuff can be overcome in that way. But there's also the department ability to come in and assist with that as well.
Thank you. Paul, one more time, and then we gotta move on. You're on mute.
I didn't know I had my hand still up. Rebecca, I thank you very much. When Maine Forest Service, when we file a forest operation notification with the Maine Forest Service, it has now gone, this was part of what I discussed in Sweden too, it has now gone to an electronic system online, which speeds up the turnaround time. All of that information that we file with the Maine Forest Service is then passed on to the local code officer. My contact information is the licensed forester, my cell phone number, my address, the harvesters, the landowners. So all the information pertaining to the harvester is passed on to the CEO. We used to do it, well, since 1989, Don, it was done on paper. And then the Maine Forest Service would mail that to a copy of that to the municipality for the code officer with all that same information. But there is a sharing of all that information. And thank you for your comments. I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you, Paul. We're going to move on to the next agenda item, which is to basically, I'd like to see what the group thinks about where we need to go from here, specific to the issues that were raised regarding the types of forestry regulations that are happening and you know, the other general issues like outreach and so on. So, Tom Doak, you got your hand up. Go first.
Thanks, Don. Well, from all this discussion, and I can tell you that we actually, our organization owns land in 10% of all municipalities now. And I can tell you there are a lot more ordinances, forestry related ordinances that are out there that are not on your list. And I think everybody kind of knows that. So I think I think there's some question whether those were ever legally adopted, frankly. I don't know if they've ever been challenged, but there's a lot more out there. So I had some things that I thought we might want to put on the list of things we ought to do. I think one thing that's not clear is what constitutes a forestry ordinance that requires review. I think we should probably clarify that for municipalities, because I'm guessing some of them think unless they have a comprehensive forest ordinance that they don't have to consult. So I would look at that. I would also think you might want to, we might want to consider something that until the Forest Service certifies that the process has been followed, that's in because they have to consult with, and that ordinance can't go into effect until you've gone through the process that the statute requires, and the Forest Service simply certifies, yep, there's all the steps have been, or the town must certify or something to the Forest Service that all steps somehow to assure that all things were accomplished, or an ordinance can't go into effect. I think that would be really helpful. And then the official list becomes where the Forest Service has it. So a landowner who's trying to figure out if the ordinance, if there is an ordinance, would go to the Forest Service, and that would be it, because that would be where they've all been certified. I think something like that would be helpful. I think you could look at the idea of, was there some penalty for frivolous? I don't know that there are a lot of frivolous and harassment type kind of things, but we could put into place something that might prevent those things, like the landowner liability law that protects landowners if they're sued, or the harassment law about hunters or something. There might be something there that would just kind of be proactive and deter kind of frivolous actions. And then two other points I have are, I think I don't know what you do with all these ordinances that are out there that aren't in compliance, that don't make any sense. And I think what you might want to do is say each of those municipalities need to, submit if you have an ordinance, give them an X number of, time to submit them to the Forest Service. And if they're not in compliance with the statute, that they have X amount of time to go through the process that they are required to go through, or those ordinances are not in place, become void. Not immediately, but give them time to, follow. Any that did it legally are fine, but everybody has to come back in and say, here you go, here's what we did. And then you can check to see if they're all legally adopted, and give them a reasonable amount of time to do that. I think that would be really helpful to kind of clean up the mess that's kind of out there. Now, the mess is some of it's accidental, clearly. And then the last thing, there are a couple of towns that have such an exorbitant fee on a permit, which is not, I don't know that you can do anything about that, but I mean, that one way to keep people from cutting trees is just make a fee so high that it's not worth it. And there is at least one town that has such a high fee that I imagine nobody really wants to cut trees. So you might look at something like that, but I don't know if that can be addressed. But those are my kind of thoughts from listening to all this discussion.
Thanks, Tom. I got a question. Your second point was requiring Maine Forest Service to certify that the process has been followed. So you're talking about something that would be similar to DEP certifying that a shoreline zoning ordinance is valid.
Well, yeah, I think this would be, I don't know if it's the Forest Service or the municipality has to certify, and you provide them a list of all the requirements or something. So they have to check it off and certify it, all these steps were made. And if you get one of them and you've never been consulted, I'm assuming that you would go back and say, no, you didn't follow it. But yeah. If the form, it may be more appropriate for the municipality to certify, but you are the registry essentially. There'd be a central registry held by the Forest Service, so somebody could look and say, okay, here's the ordinance. And then I think you have to put something in there about hopefully to dropping them. There are a number of towns that have modified them. We deal with towns all the time that you get what you think is right, and then they say, well, no, we changed that. That's not what we have. This is what we have now. Oh, we didn't put that, we didn't publish that, or here's the new one. And so that somehow I don't know how you deal with that, but sometimes you get old information. So.
Yeah,
I'll stop.
thank you. Anybody else? I see somebody, Heather, got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I think I jotted down all the suggestions that you had made, and it seems like a lot of this could be work done by the department that wouldn't require an additional statute, and that could be kind of very helpful for educating the municipalities about the process that's already on the books, but just sort of also taking the opportunity to share some of the challenges that have come up in the past when ordinances have been really hard to enforce or comply with. I think there are a couple of things that you mentioned that suggest maybe there would be a need for additional legislation, and I'm not sure about that. It seems like it would be great if we could avoid that and do more of the collaboration and education. I did want to just clarify when you talked about the ordinances that are not in compliance with the Forest Practices Act, they become void. You're talking about those ordinances that are less strict, correct? Or are you saying that you can't go, that a municipality cannot go above and beyond? I guess I was just.
I was saying any of those that did not. I was talking specifically about any of those that didn't go through the process that was required in the statute.
Oh.
That there would be a timeline given to those people, to those municipalities, my idea, if you want to get a comprehensive list, you'd ask every municipality if you have an ordinance, send it in, and it would be identified, and the Forest Service would if they didn't consult with the Forest Service, I'm assuming that go back and say, well, you did not follow the law, and so now you have X number of year time to either comply, and here's how to comply, or at a certain date, if you just want to not have it anymore, you can get rid of it, or it will expire at some point if you don't go through the process that was required initially. Because I'm guessing there'd be a legal challenge to them anyway, because they weren't adopted by the statute. So it would be the town's best interest, I would think, to legally to adopt them in the process that's required by law. So I wasn't trying to undermine anything at that point. I'm just simply saying, let's get everybody into compliance. That was my thought.
I have one more quick question that is probably for you, Tom, maybe Don as well, but just I'm wondering if some of the work that comes out of this could dovetail with the work to raise awareness about the opportunities for small woodland owners and the forest carbon sequestration opportunity. I mean, if that could be, because obviously there's some work going on around raising awareness about that. It seems like it should be an opportunity to raise awareness about the importance of managing in the interest of climate-friendly management practices.
I'm all for education, but I think this is more of an education of municipal officials, and the rules and the standards that the responsibilities they have under the statute for for adopting an ordinance. And certainly a municipality can also, when they are letting people know about the hearing or the ordinance or whatever the notification requirements are, I can't remember, they're welcome to send something out too. But I mean, I'm all in favor of educating the landowners about the carbon stuff. As you know, you've been following it with us. I want everybody to understand it.
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking that it seems like one of the concerns is that it's a lot of work. So just kind of
it's a
joining
lot of work.
joining forces could be helpful, that's all.
I'm happy to work with you on that. How's that? Even outside this project, how's that?
That's
We
great.
can find something we can actually work on together. That'll be novel, now won't it?
Yes.
Okay. I appreciate that.
Rebecca,
I just kind of wanted to back up what Heather said, because this is one of the problems at the municipal level. There's conflicting paradigms for land use that are coming in from environmental needs, the climate needs, and carbon sequestration needs. So that is a confusing thing. It would be great to have a single entity that someone could go to as a municipal official, as you're doing 8,000 other things, to say, help me figure out how to meet all of these goals with one ordinance. Because the confliction is often the conflicting regulatory regimes that are felt at that municipal level. And I think that education, collaboration, and communication are those keys to all of this, and the keys to solving all of these issues.
thank you. Paul, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I was gonna agree with Rebecca as a municipal official. I don't get home to eat dinner very often at night with the amount of liaison meetings, and as the liaison of the environmental committee in New Gloucester, as well as the land management planning committee, which is charged with the ordinance drafting. There's a lot going on, and I agree with you, Rebecca. The message about, the mixed messages from different groups about carbon and all of this. I work with Cumberland. We've done inventories of the timber. Cumberland is trying to become carbon neutral using their woodland. So I'm well aware of carbon, but the message is, trees shouldn't be cut. Trees should be managed. It is a conflicting story. So I agree with that. And I will say that as the regional enforcement coordinator for I don't know how many years with the Maine Forest Service, I spent a tremendous amount of time educating landowners, as a district forester, educating municipalities. And when we were changing laws, we put a tremendous outreach effort into educating. But having said that, at that time, and I don't know the number now, there was 10 foresters. I was in charge of 3 counties for the state. So I had all the cities, Portland, Lewiston, Auburn, Bath, Brunswick. I had all of those plus the 3 counties to educate on forestry. And Rebecca, I mean, everybody's short-staffed, you know what I mean? And I totally agree with education. I just don't know who. Sweden hired me, you know what I mean, as a consultant, and that worked out well. But all municipalities aren't going to hire a consulting forester. They're not going to hire Mike Morse from former DEP. So if we're going to lean on education, we got to figure out a way to make it bigger, because there's not enough foresters with the Department of Conservation. There's not enough consultants to reach all those municipalities. But thank you, Rebecca. I appreciate the comments.
Thank you. I'm going to recognize Tom, but before Tom goes, I just wanted to say that the Maine Forest Service reviews all the comprehensive plans, the drafts that come in from the municipalities, and we scan them with a fine-tooth comb for references to forestry operations and community forestry issues, and we do comment back to the towns. That's often the time when we get a signal that a town is thinking about going down a certain road with respect to regulating forestry, and we do comment on that. Thank you. Tom?
Well, if I remember their existing statute, that if a town wants to have a forestry ordinance, they must involve a licensed forester, not the Forest Service to write it for them. They must either have a volunteer or hire somebody, right? So that's one of the conditions of adopting any forestry ordinance.
That is correct.
And and if a town wants to do it, then fine. That there's no requirement to them to do it. But if they do it, they have a responsibility to follow a process, and that includes having a forester, a licensed forester, assisting them with the development of it. And I don't know. I'd be interested in what MMA thinks. Are these ordinances actually enforceable if they haven't followed the process. I mean, what would you say, Rebecca, what would you say to a town that has not followed the statutory process for ordinance? Would Maine Municipal tell them they can't enforce it, or there's a question about enforcement, or?
Tom, I can't tell you what we would say, because it would be based on that ordinance as to whether or not it met some sort of standard. But obviously, if they didn't follow a process that is prescripted in statute, then obviously they're going to face a legal challenge for that. So if there's a prescriptive process in statute, then that is the required standard.
So I think, I think, and I'm not trying to penalize the municipalities, but I think we ought to find a way to get those that aren't legally adopted, somehow off the books or legally adopted or something. I mean, that's part of this. I think that's part of the problem. And I think there are a lot more out there than the Forest Service knows, I'm sure. Well, we already know that.
Well, I think that's the whole process of a legal challenge by those entities, and that communication piece that needs to happen. And some of that might be, guess what, notification, this is the process that you're supposed to go through. Did you use that? Just simply that question and that prompting to a lot of the ordinance committees and planning boards is going to start that process. Again, these things are adopted in good faith, and they're driven by their local community members often. That the citizens have a stakeholder in that, and the municipal officials are stuck in the middle between both. So I think knowledge that there might be an issue is key, and opportunity and resources to solve those issues is a necessary piece.
I was director of the Forest Service when this came up, and the original bill, I think, was to preempt municipalities, and the compromise was, no, we won't preempt. It wasn't a Forest Service rule, legislation, but it was to, okay, in return of not preemption, you have to follow a process. And so hopefully we can get back to that.
Thank you. Will. Sorry, I didn't see your hand first time.
I just raised it. I like Tom's approach. Doesn't that seem like an excellent platform for an educational outreach? Rather than move forward, why don't we fix what's the damage that's been done, and you go back to these towns that haven't followed protocol and say, you didn't have to start over, you can still do it, but there's a process. But here's the reason why maybe you should reconsider. It just seems like that would be a good starting point. It might diffuse a lot of this, by just the outreach effort. That would be a great way to identify a problem child and start there.
Thank you. The question comes back to, do we notify all the towns? Do we reach out to all towns knowing that there's a bunch that have no additional forestry regulations? I don't think there's a majority of the towns that have these regs. Paul?
Yeah, just one more comment, Don. Tom, to your point, based on the forest practices, that was 1989, the original forest practices. The ordinance, and I know you own land in New Gloucester as well, the ordinance I just held up was 1986, which is prior to the forest practices. So it was adopted prior to the law. So there are those out there. There's dates that you have to look at as well. And I agree on the educational piece, but Dawn, my example would be, I won't name the town, but it's a town I work in regularly that thinks they've adopted statewide standards. Yeah. They've put it in their ordinance. It's not legal because they didn't get approval from the DEP, and right. They still have their old ordinance on, and you still have to buy a fee to harvest. I mean, so there's a lot of outreach. That's a lot of outreach. So I just don't. If the Department of Conservation is going to do it, I think you're going to need some more staff. And I don't think every municipality is going to reach out to a consultant forester. See, and that just with statewide standards, we still have gaps there that are problems in ordinances. So I just leave it at that. But from a municipal standpoint, you know, guidance is always good. Thank you.
Anybody else? All your hands still up.
Sorry.
It's okay. I'm not seeing any hands.
Good feedback when I heard of it.
So, folks, we're a little bit ahead of schedule. Do you want to just go to public comment and then we talk about next meeting?
Yep.
Okay, we'll go to public comment now. We're going to unmute the folks who are have been watching. And if you have a question or comment, please raise your hand to be recognized. Are they all set?
Then they're all muted, but I was waiting for a hand.
Okay. I'm not seeing any hands.
When you see them all.
I should.
Yeah.
Wow. Gary Fish, could you just raise your hand so we can make sure this is working? Thank you. Okay, it's working. Alrighty, if there is no public comment, then we're going to move on to the final item, which is talking about the meeting outcome, homework assignments, next meeting. If you're all set for that, so can you mute those people? Okay, thanks. Okay, so we had some good presentations today. We had a pretty good discussion on the process. I think one of the key take-homes is about doing more outreach and education, and we need to put our heads together here to figure out how we're going to do that. Tom outlined a pretty good menu for questions that I think would be the basis for something we could come back to the group with for on at the next meeting, if you're all okay with that. Rebecca, at the first meeting, Kate had indicated that she would, or the MMA would send an email to the towns inquiring about their experience with the Right to Farm Act. And she said she was waiting for you to come back.
Yes, John, we have a pretty comprehensive survey that is going out next week to all municipalities. We're serving each of us on about 8 different study groups. So we have a whole list of questions and we're trying to get them in one go. So the plan is to have that before the meeting that I had on my calendar previously, which is, I believe, the end of October. So I will have the results and be able to talk about that on that end of month meeting, if that is still a go. I didn't have the 6th on my calendar, but.
Okay. Let me, I gotta step out for a second to talk with. Okay, thank you, Rebecca. Is that survey final?
We're working on those pieces right now. So there is still some editing that's in there.
Would you be able to ask a question about forestry ordinances?
Yeah, well, that's one of the questions as to whether or not they
Okay.
have them.
Perfect.
So that will also prompt them. They're also informed of this particular working group as being the impetus for that, and then asking some questions about why, if they had adopted it, what are those pressures, so that we can deal with those as well.
Excellent.
Perfect.
So with that in mind, then we had planned to have the next meeting on October 6th, but I was thinking that we would need it for MMA to present on those results. So it sounds like we don't need to have this meeting on October 6th. That will give us more time to absorb what we took in today and come back to you with something. And so you'll be able to present at the end of October.
Yes, if that works for everyone, I think that would be great, because we'll have some theoretically comprehensive data back from municipalities as part of that.
Yeah, I can't speak for everybody, but I think that for myself, one less meeting is fine.
I think everyone will agree.
Yep. So our next meeting then is scheduled for Tuesday, October 26th. And we will come back to you with something before the meeting for you to react to.
Yep, we're good.
Okay, Patty, did you have anything else you wanted to say?
No, just thank you all again for coming on this meeting, and send along any thoughts you have that you might not have asked, or questions you might not have asked on the meeting, and we'll see you on the 26th.
One last thing is several people did send me examples of local ordinances, and it was a lot of material, so I'm still trying to digest it by going online. But the list is now up to 32 that we have information on, and I believe I sent an earlier draft of that around to you folks. Also, a list of the towns that have consulted with Maine Forest Service on ordinances. There's 14 of them. We have a couple of issues of non-consultation, which are pointed out at the bottom, but I just wanted to point out that in nearly all these cases, that the towns that call us about something, they ended up either repealing their ordinance or finding that they were really dealing with a non-forestry issue and dealt with it in that way. So consultation does work.
Thanks, Don. And if you have that list, it might be great to get those folks in the room for that meeting on the 26th too, or at least a municipal official from there. Because if there are 33 that are a problem too, that's a heck of a lot easier to deal with than 480.
Yeah, like I said, we only have that, these are the only ones we know about that we're aware of.
But we may be able to knock 33 of them off, or at least address them.
Sure. Tom Doak.
Don, I think I mentioned the first meeting, I did some of the first consultations when the law went into effect. And I will say a lot of them are really, once you have a conversation with these, if we can follow the process, a lot of times the municipality realized that's not really what they want to do. Or my experience was there were usually a couple of people driving it that didn't really, that. And once we started talking to folks in the town about what the impacts would be, and they'd have to enforce it, and whether this made sense, and was this going to deal with the problem they thought they had, most of them would say, we don't need an ordinance. So that's why I think it's been critical to do that consultation. And it's unfortunate we don't have that, because I think there will be fewer ordinances. But let's figure out a way to fix that.
Yep. Thanks, Tom. Okay, if nobody's got, I see a hand up down the list there. I don't know who it is. Oh, I guess Tom's hand was up. Okay, we're good. All right, thank you, everybody. I'm going to close the meeting now.
Thank you.